Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today is podcast number 1696. The topic is nutrition, and the title is Changing Calories Without Changing Meal Sizes. Ooh. So I was in a discussion with one of my clients. They're a competitive athlete, and we were talking about some meal changes that we were going to be making in the upcoming stages of their prep as they get ready for a competition. And they're also a trainer as well. And we were discussing how the changes we were going to make may not be common to other people. Like it's something that I was talking to them back and forth with, and we know, but they're like, yeah, I should probably tell my clients about this. They're like, did you ever do a podcast on this? And I was like, oh, no, I don't think so. So I wanted to make a podcast on it. What we were doing was we're actually going through and we're reducing their calories per meal, but without reducing the portions per meal. That sounds like, how in the world are you doing that? The idea is this person is very sensitive to the amount of food they eat. It's not going to hurt their feelings by saying they're sensitive. We actually talked about that. But when they feel like they're eating less per meal, they start to get these hunger cravings. They start to feel like they're on a diet, and they start to freak out. So we've, over the years of working together, found that if we just change the foods they're eating but keep their volumes the same, their body kind of doesn't go into that freak out mode. And that allows them to consume less calories as we need to prep for the competition, but their volume in their meal, like the meal size, doesn't go down. They still feel like they're eating a lot, and that allows them to have a better kind of mindset throughout the process. So I want to share just a couple of the changes that we're going through as a way to kind of highlight this concept. In their carbs, their carbohydrate sources, we've been eating a lot of jasmine rice. Now, to make this easier, this athlete likes to just eat the same things all the time, but I do force them to have different foods for breakfast and different like supplements like multivitamins and other things to make sure we have our kind of bases met. But they would rather just eat the same thing all day, every day, because they find it easier. It's just not nutritionally the best, so I force them to have a little bit of variety in there. But they're having jasmine rice 3 meals a day at 150 grams per meal. That provides 40 grams of carbohydrates. Okay? So jasmine rice, 150 grams of weight, like if they weigh their food, 150 grams of weight provides 40 grams of carbohydrates. Okay? Now, one of the changes we're going to make is we're going to be swapping out jasmine rice for peas. They like peas, and at 150 grams of peas, it provides only 21 grams of carbohydrates. So that actually reduces 80 calories per meal. If they have 3 meals a day, that's a 240 calorie reduction. But they still get a decent volume of food per meal. Like the weight doesn't change. 150 grams of rice, 150 grams of peas. The next change we might make, as an example, would be to drop down to green beans. If they have 150 grams of green beans in weight, like they weigh on a food scale, 150 grams of green beans, there's only about 10 grams of carbohydrates. So that's an additional 40 calorie reduction per meal, an additional 120 calorie reduction per day, since they have 3 meals per day of that food. So it's pretty neat. So you can see how we can stay at 150 grams per food item, from jasmine rice down to peas, down to green beans, but it allows us to change calories. So although the food volume is staying the same, their overall calorie reduction throughout the entire process would be 360 calories per day. Now we're also doing this with their protein sources. We're going from a fattier meat that we use in the off season to help increase calorie content down to a less fatty meat. Now, some of these I'm simplifying the numbers so it makes the most sense via podcast. The numbers are rounded in a sense. But if we did sirloin steak at 8 ounces, they would have 32 grams of fat in the sirloin steak. If we switch that to 90-10 ground beef with 8 ounces, they have 22 grams of fat. So that's a 90 calorie per meal reduction, 270 calories per day reduction. Then as we get leaner, we would cut even more calories by switching from 8 ounces of 90-10 beef to 8 ounces of chicken. 8 ounces of chicken only has 4 grams of fat, so that's 160 calorie reduction per meal. That's 480 calories reduced per day from where they were with the ground beef. So just these couple changes alone, we're able to, as we go through all those steps, we're able to reduce 360 calories per day through carbohydrates, and we're able to reduce 750 calories through fats. That would be huge, right? You're talking about over 1,000 calorie reduction by just simply switching the carbs from rice to peas to green beans, and the meat from sirloin steak to ground beef to chicken breast. But the carbs stayed at 150 grams of weight, and the meat stayed at 8 ounces. So throughout all these changes, their food volume, the amount that they get to feel per meal that they're eating, stays relatively the same. But we have a huge change, over 1,000 calorie reduction per day. And then during the off season, like the seasons where we want to try to increase calories, we just do this in reverse. We slowly pick more carbohydrate-dense carbohydrate sources, and we slowly pick more fat-dense protein sources. I don't usually get their fat too high, so again, this is just like kind of like an example. But this is cool to see how often when people think of dieting or trying to gain size, when they think of reducing calories or trying to add calories, they think of reducing or adding foods, meaning you're going to eat less or you're going to eat more. That doesn't need to be the case. You can actually choose foods based on like what's called nutrient density, meaning how many nutrients per volume of food. So how many carbs per 150 grams, for example, or how many grams of fat per 8 ounces, for example. So how many nutrients are jammed into that food, right? So the more or less nutriently dense the food is a great change to make rather than changing the amount of food, more or less. Anybody who's ever tried to eat more to gain size realizes that it becomes very quickly burdensome and a huge pain in the ass because you just can't flat out eat any more. Well, don't focus on more. Pick more nutriently dense foods. Keep your volume of food the same, but just choose foods that have a greater amount of calories per volume. Same thing when trying to lose body fat. Rather than eating less and less and less and feeling more and more restricted, feeling more and more hungry, just pick foods that are less nutriently dense. You can still eat a lot of food, but it just doesn't have a lot of calories in it. So it's really cool is learning how to kind of taper your carbohydrates and fats up and down while maintaining meal volume. It's a really cool way to kind of modulate your calories without feeling too full or too hungry. So I thought that was something fun to throw out there and just discuss. That's a normal thing that we do, so much so that I forgot to make a podcast about it. So I was thanking for the client to prompt me to do that. But this is a cool thing. So I would urge you is if you're into or going to be making changes to your nutrition, don't only think of eating more or less, think of nutrient density. So that way you can kind of more normalize the volume per meal while still getting the calorie change that you need for your goal. Awesome. Well, if you have any follow-up questions, email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, you can consider donating, which you can do on our website to help cover the overall cost. And if you like the podcast, you can find more information from us on our social media channels. You can find us and please follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.